first on the hot seat. Of course, the head coach of the Loyola Greyhounds, coming off a 7-8 season. They lost in the Patriot League tournament to Navy. I'm sure he loves that I'm reminding him of that to start this conversation. It's a pleasure, as always, to welcome back to the program Coach Charley Toomey, who is up first this morning. Coach, it's Glenn and Patrick. It's always good to chat with you. Thank you for taking the time for us.
Yeah. Hey, guys, it's great to hear your voices again. It means it's springtime. And, obviously you go outside and you see 40-degree weather versus 5-degree weather.
Yeah, right?
It feels like we're close.
It's time.
Right?
It's time, which, of course, means that it'll be snowing next weekend when you guys are getting ready to play Maryland. That's the way that it works. Coach, a lot of changes, a lot of new faces on this roster. Can you kind of break down for me how purposeful that is? Like how much it's maybe time for a new group of guys to come into this program and sort of make their mark as you guys look to kind of get back to the top of the Patriot League?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a bittersweet ending of COVID, right? You had so many guys that had fifth year opportunities that chose to stay on. And last year was our largest graduating class since I've been here of 23. And so you're losing roughly half of your locker room, which kind of put us in a position of going to the portal and trying to bring in, a transfer, but also the largest incoming freshman class that I've ever had. So we have 19 freshmen, in the locker room, and it's created some challenges. There's no question about that. The puppies. There's a lot of puppies running around in the kennel. But we also think that we've got some talented guys that are continuing to develop. And, last weekend we had a scrimmage and we saw 9 of them on the field at one point and, through the course of the day. So, we're hoping that we can grow up a little more quickly than, you typically would, where maybe you have 2 or 3 guys out there that are brand new to the program. We're running around with a lot of new faces. And then also some of the guys that are getting their first minutes, really like a Matt Dixon, really hasn't had a lot of opportunities. A Ryan McGorry, some of those guys, that have been in the locker room, just kind of sitting behind a Patra and an Evan James, who we lost to graduation. We lost 80% of our offense to graduation last year. So, it's a work in progress. And, we're excited about what we're seeing. It's going to take a minute, right?
Charlie, you mentioned having lost so much on the offensive end. You still do have Matthew Minikis, and I feel like that's probably going to be one of the centerpieces for you guys. How is he doing? What have you kind of thought of his preseason, and just how valuable do you think he's going to be for you guys this season?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would start off with the team electing him a captain. And so, I think that's a big role change for him. Now he's kind of got that outspoken, demeanor that we need on the sideline and certainly in the locker room offensively. And yeah, I mean, he's a bullet. He's one of the ones that but our opponents know that, right? So they're going to game plan for him and force other people to do things. Between really our 2 guys in Remy Reynolds, who's kind of a known commodity defensively, and Matt Minikis, we need those guys to really lead and to be great seniors, juniors, and Minikis is a junior, but great players in our locker room that are just kind of going to show the younger guys the way.
You say Remy Reynolds is a known commodity defensively. I believe he's also a known commodity offensively now, Coach. I'm pretty sure you're selling him a little bit short there with one of the best moments in the entire country a season ago. Some of the newcomers that are on this team, a couple of names stand out. I know you were talking up a little bit about Kyle McCarthy and how he played in fall ball. Can you give me a little bit more of a thumbnail on him? And then a guy that I know was a really highly rated recruit is Mason Cook, someone that you expect can step in pretty quickly for this team.
Yeah, I think those are certainly 2 guys that are continuing to develop. Kyle has shown pretty well through the fall and certainly last weekend in our scrimmage. He kind of reminds me a lot of a Matt Houston for us, a big downhill dodging midi. But again, he's a freshman. He can run into double teams, and we're trying to work on some of those things. He's kind of what we don't have, which is that big, strong midi. We've got a lot of smaller, super skilled, players that, I think Kyle's got a going to have to be a really impactful freshman for us, early. And a guy that, again, I think is going to do a lot of the initiating for us. But then he also is capable, righty and lefty, to kind of get his hands free, and is one of the guys with a little bit of velocity on his shot. And Mason Cook is exactly what everybody in Baltimore saw as a player, and at Blakefield. He's just super skilled, and a good decision maker. But again, I think any player that's coming into Division I from I don't care what league, it's a little bit faster, and so that's what he's kind of finding out right now, is just kind of to learn to play with the pace of a Division I game, and to get up to speed there. And but we see those guys being two cogs in the wheel that we're going to need this season to be successful for sure.
In the cage, Luke Stout obviously done with his time at Loyola, and a handful of guys obviously that got a little bit of time last season, most notably Max Watkinson got a couple starts. How is that competition kind of shaped up to this point? And you've been through it obviously with first-time goalies. How different is it when you have a goalie that's just kind of acclimating themselves to a larger role than what they're accustomed to?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of went through a moment last year where I think Ben Abel got a start. I think Max Watkinson, got a few starts. And you said it right off the bat. There's competition, and so they see that. I don't think they feel that 100% in practice, and maybe they do. I played that position. I know what it's like. But that's kind of where we are. We just continue to tell them that everybody has to be ready at a moment's notice. And I would even throw Carter Hagan in there as one of our freshmen from Connecticut, Darien goalie, who's played really well through the course of the early spring. And so those guys, we're gonna probably go into this thing. Again, we still have 3 days to make this decision, but last weekend we started Max. And we felt like there's some areas where, Ben could probably, win the job over the next 3 days or not. But I would say Max is probably, we're leaning that direction as an older guy that's kind of had those minutes. But it's a long season, and I feel like, we just need to continue to develop there. And, as I told those guys, the guy that is going to be the most consistent and the best leader and command his defense, probably the one that gives up the least amount of rebounds so we don't have to redefend, is probably going to be the guy that settles in.
Loyola lacrosse coach Charley Toomey is with us on the preview show. They open at Georgetown on Saturday before hosting Maryland the following Saturday. Kind of a similar story at the Dot. Coach Carson Hall probably has the most experience. Is that the guy that maybe gets the first crack at it this season?
Yeah, that's been another battle. Sawyer Allen was hurt last year. He's been around. He kind of was a transfer from from a Division III program to us, and so those guys have been battling. I would even throw Mason Graves and Aiden Kamerer. For once, Coach Vagness has a stable of guys for practice that he can work with. No doubt about it. Carson Hall was probably our guy last year, but there wasn't with Sawyer Allen's injury just a lot around him, and so we feel like we've got some good competition there. I would tell you that Sawyer Allen took probably the bulk of the faceoffs last week in our scrimmage, but I could easily see, depending on the matchup, and that's another thing. It's a game within the game, as you guys know, at the Faceoff X. One guy probably gets 3 reps, and you want to move on to the next so that they don't get a steady feel for who you're throwing out there. We certainly feel like we've got a couple capable guys, to throw to the X to give opponents a little to think about.
And I guess in general, Coach, right? Like we think about some of your best teams. Faceoff was such an important part of all of that, and obviously the Savios and the success they had. No matter who it is, how do you get back to that level of having more of the possession and the things that we grew accustomed to when you guys were winning the Patriot League?
Yeah, again, I think that the communication between that as a unit, right? It's not just the face-off guy. I know that with Bailey and certainly with Graham, they were capable of picking the ball up themselves. And so we had really good box out wings. Now without having a Mustang Sally, a Peyton Razanka, Matt Higgins, some of those short sticks, we've actually got some new faces there as well. So it's developing that communication, on those wings. I can tell you this though, everybody jokes around about, winning our biggest games in the Final Four. We won 7 faceoffs through the course of the whole weekend, and we're able to, somehow beat Notre Dame and Maryland many years ago. But I'm a firm believer in you just got to get stops, right? And so if you're growing up there, and that could be the case for us a little bit, throughout the early part of the season with the Big Ten and the ACC, if we're growing up there, we might not get the bulk of them. We got to get stops and let those guys continue to develop through the season. And that's the one thing, and you talked about it, the Patriot League, Hayashi at Navy and Coletti, up at Army. I mean, we got some of the best face-off guys in the country in this league. And so, it's we don't see them until later in the year. It's how we develop as a program.
Charlie, you brought up a little earlier about the fifth-year guys not being around anymore, and I'm curious if this feels like a little bit of a throwback, even if it is maybe a younger team than what you would have been accustomed to in the pre-COVID era, and whether this is something that maybe you're a little more comfortable with, just the 4-class situation, as opposed to the 5 classes that you guys were juggling the last few years.
Yeah, what's fun about it is you're coaching every day, right? Like new drills, even drills that we've done for a long time. You've got to go out and you've got to coach, for 2 straight hours. You can't just roll the ball out and they're going to get to their spots, call a drill, and they're going to run. And you've got 5 freshmen to kind of fill in, 6, 7, 8 freshmen to fill into the lines, and they're going to go take those last reps. I mean, those freshmen are at the front of the line, so you're coaching, everything. And I would tell you that that's been a lot of fun. You just have to live through some of the mistakes. I joked around with some of our alumni, like we're just a bunch of golden retrievers. Like you throw a ball and we're just going to have a lot of guys chasing it right now. And, you hope that we can kind of be that team throughout the year, but then develop, some great spacing, some 6-on-6, and, make something happen where we can find Minikis on the backside and let him do his thing. But in the meantime, it has been fun to have a younger group of guys. But I'm not going to lie, you pull your hair out a little bit for sure.
I understand that. I understand it. It's funny, you broke the school record for wins last year. Was part of the deal that Dave said, hey, look, you can have the record, but then you got to put Sean on the staff. That's the way it's going to have to work if you're going to take the record down.
Yeah, I joke with Coach. He said, man, I'm just glad it wasn't against me. Well, I let him remember that, you're the guy that knocked me out of the tournament last year at Navy.
Fair.
But we are very happy and excited to have Sean on our staff. He's got a great mindset, a great, guy for developing, certainly offensive talent. I know Coach Van finally, is excited to have somebody down there, on his end, kind of another set of eyeballs, if you will, and somebody on a whiteboard. And more importantly, what Sean does a great job of is just developing relationships with our guys, and being a younger coach. I think it's excellent. And then he's got an eye for the recruiting, so it's just going to help us in so many different ways, on this program. So we just have to watch what we say. We start telling old Coach Cottle stories, right? And we're like, yeah, but he goes, Coach, I've heard them all.
With the non-conference schedule, I thought one interesting tweak for you guys this year was moving that Towson game, that midweek game, to April as opposed to the late February or early March spot it's been in. What was kind of the thinking behind that? Does it kind of clear things up a little bit with that rigorous February schedule? Maybe break up some things in league play as well? What was kind of behind that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our main goal is to finally get that game to a Saturday, and that's something we've been working on, trying to figure out. But really, the only way to move it to a Saturday currently, is to really look at your February games. And so, what we both decided, well, if it's going to be a midweek game, let's try to look at our spring breaks first, which don't align. So, what we did is we just moved it into April. and tried to figure out a way to play it a little bit later in the season, so possibly we can get some more people in the stands for both teams, because I think it is a great rivalry. And certainly having been a player in this locker room, I know what Towson Week was like as a player. I know how our alumni feel about that game. It'd certainly be nice to have a few more of them in the stands to watch it.
Coach, broadly, right? Like this team to get that proverbial next step, and I know it's not going to be easy with a young team, but how does this team grow up quickly and get into a place where it's ready? It's not going to be easy right out of the chute, clearly, because you always keep that schedule difficult in the non-conference. But how does this young team get together to be ready to compete in the Patriot League this season?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail right on the head. It's kind of baptism by fire, right? And so there's a reason we play the schedule we play. I think it's great for recruiting. I think it's great, for our fan base. We're committed to it, but we have to continue to develop and recognize that yes, we play early against Colgate on March 1st. But the bulk of our schedule, is in March and April. And so it's not what we look like now. And certainly this weekend, it's how we develop. And even as coaches, like how we figure out and start to fall into who is our first, line midfield, who is our second line midfield, because we are juggling an awful lot. And when you have young guys, the consistency might not be there day to day. And that's what we try to, tell these guys is we're looking for the most consistent players so that you make our jobs a little bit easier. And that's just the world that we live in right now. And like I said, it's a lot of fun because you're coaching, but we're probably not as clean as we'd like to be really anywhere on the field with a very young short stick unit and just a lot of new faces offensively. But we're getting there. And like I said, we're going to chase that tennis ball around.
We're going to look forward to seeing how it all comes together. As we mentioned, it starts Saturday at Georgetown, and then big one at home. Yeah, it's cold, but it's going to be an awesome atmosphere. Loyola in Maryland on February 8th at Ridley. Coach, appreciate you as always. Look forward to talking to you next week. Thank you for taking the time for us.
Always appreciate you guys. Thank you, fellas.
Charley Toomey, Loyola lacrosse coach, first up on the Lacrosse Preview Show. All right, Patrick Stevens, your thumbnail on the Greyhounds.
In one word, untested. And so we're going to see in February as they go through Georgetown and Maryland and Hopkins and Rutgers just how tested they're going to be. They're not going to be untested for long. So
you brought up something interesting, and obviously, look, I think everybody knows I have a vested interest here as I do call the games for Loyola, but in the last couple of years, they've had a lot of these really big early season wins. Maryland and Hopkins 2 years ago, Georgetown last year, and it's gotten the expectations kind of wild and crazy, whereas the flip side is maybe it wouldn't be the end of the world if this year maybe that's the part of the schedule that doesn't go quite as well, but that helps get them more prepared and ready for the Patriots.
Yeah, and I think also one of the things that's happened here over the last few years is you've seen the sort of stratification in the RPI where the ACC and the Big Ten teams are further ahead for sure, simply by playing each other and going out and playing decent in non-conference play. And so it makes it hard for the Patriot League. I should throw the Ivy League into that group too.
Sure.
But it makes it hard for the Patriot League, or while we're talking about other teams in the area, the CAA with Towson, to be multi-bid leagues, and it's getting harder and harder. And so, I think if you're Loyola, whether you like it or not, that the games against Maryland and Hopkins and what have you, they're wonderful luxuries to go get if you can win them. But the most important thing is can you plow through your conference? Can you peak in May? Can you win those 2 or 3 games the last week of the season going into the tournament? And so I think for Loyola, if we give Loyola the same record the last few years, but we flip things where you lose those early season games, but you win a couple extra conference games, does your perception of them change a little bit? I think it does a little bit, because like you said, especially 2 years ago, that team got a lot of people's hopes up with the way it started, and there just wasn't much left in the tank at the end of that season. And last year was a bit more of a slog as that group tried to figure things out. So. And I think that was somewhat a function, frankly, of Georgetown having a lot of new faces in that opener and not know. I think that Loyola played well, but I think it was a function of Georgetown maybe not really knowing who it was at that stage either. So tough spot. But I do think that, if you're Loyola with this group, it's definitely, even if it's not necessarily linear, you should reasonably expect this to be a group that gets better as the year goes along. I don't think this is a team that's going to play its best lacrosse or have its best results in February.